Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for coming today. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm coming to you from the Laurentians, and on this beautiful morning, the sheep and the dogs in the background are quite active. So perhaps they'll join my presentation. So I wanted to thank everybody for coming again and for this opportunity for me to share with you the experiences that I've been having over the past few years on doing community-based participatory research in many different Indigenous communities across Quebec. So PRSPECH was working in partnership with the First Nations Human Resources Development Commission of Quebec, and we were able to conduct 3 projects together. I'll always make a little pause after each slide just to give my interpreter a bit of time, just so you know. So for today's presentation, I was keeping in mind the diversity of all of our participants. And so I wanted to make the information accessible and to just give a very brief introduction for those of you who are not familiar with the new sort of context and situation for the ethical demands of research done with Indigenous partners. In the second part of the presentation, I wanted to touch on some of the research strategies that we found very effective in our research projects, and share with you some of those strategies. And in the final part of the presentation, which I hope to be the majority of the presentation, I wanted to share with you the type of knowledge transfer deliverables that we were able to create, which we were very excited about and which has been well received in the communities that we worked with, in allowing us to transfer the knowledge that we gained from our research in the communities back to the communities and also to interested advocates and allies. So those are the sort of the 3 main sections, and it's a very short presentation, so we'll just touch on each topic briefly. Okay. And so for that very brief introduction, for those who are not well acquainted with the area, there is a well-recognized requirement now in all research moving forward with Indigenous communities that the research past of the history and the past research has been done unequitably, has been rather poorly designed. And again, this could be many presentations in and of itself, this topic, but all to say, the research that historically has been done with communities has not benefited the communities and has not been demanded to benefit the communities who are participating in the research. And at best, what had been found was that the research was unusable by the communities. At worst, the research could be very harmful to the communities. And so what was happening was that researchers were engaging in processes that were portraying their Indigenous research participants through a deficit lens, and very negatively. And so this is especially true for First Nations people with disabilities who are facing intersectionality. And so it was very important to us to be as ethically responsible and aware as possible throughout the design of our projects. And so I wanted to share with you something in the chat, but I don't think I'm able to. Maybe, oh, here we go. I have a button. For those of you who are not familiar with the area, but perhaps you're interested in learning more about research with Indigenous populations, I wanted to share these following links with you, and I'll make reference to them throughout the presentation. Oh, that's just one. Okay. I'll put it up after, just I don't want to stop sharing, but this is an excellent resource. The first thing that I wanted to present was OCAP. And actually, you don't really need me to share a link because it's very easy to Google. So the First Nation Information Governance Center in the 80s organized and developed the OCAP principles. And so the OCAP principles are specifically highlighting the requirement for higher standards in research done with Indigenous partners, that there is a use of Indigenous methodologies and design in this research, and that the research done will both advance the knowledge area, as research is required to do, but also indigenize the field of studies, thereby promoting decolonization on many levels, and also contributing to the forward progress of the communities. And so on the OCAP website, there are trainings, there are webinars, there's a really rich resource there for people that are interested in understanding more about this research and about how to ethically design projects. And so OCAP is really a very unique, it's a very unique approach. There are no other sort of laws or concepts similar to OCAP. And it's what OCAP stands for is ownership, control, access, and possession. And so the idea is that when engaging in research with Indigenous partners, your Indigenous partners and your participants, they're the owners of this data. They will control it. They will control who has access to it, and they will be in possession of it. And so this was specifically set up to stop unethical practices that were happening in the past, where data was being collected and then it could be shared with other researchers, with pharmaceutical companies, without the consent of the Indigenous participants. So I really recommend anybody interested to have a look at OCAP, to go to the website, check out the library. There are a lot of wonderful resources there that also really give a nice framework in understanding the need for new ethical design and research design. The second document that I wanted to just touch on very quickly is the Tri-Council's policy statement on the ethical conduct for research involving humans. It's section 9 that involves in research with Indigenous populations. And there are many of the same principles of OCAP that are reflected in the TCPS. They do slightly differ, but many of the same messages are given throughout, that Indigenous methodologies are required when doing research with Indigenous populations, and that when a researcher engages in research with an Indigenous population, it is required that decolonization becomes a priority of the researcher, in addition to progressing the field of knowledge that's being investigated or researched. And that the thing that I find fascinating and my most sort of passionate goal is to also indigenize the field of research. So you as a researcher coming from your field of study, for me that is studies of disability and inclusion, that I will bring back to my field of study the Indigenous knowledge that I was privileged to receive from the research that I did. And so just very quickly, we had 3 projects. The first project had a focus on building awareness and providing our partners, again, the First Nation Human Resources Development Commission of Quebec, with the materials to create an awareness campaign for the social and professional inclusion of First Nations people with disability in the communities. The second project was specifically to create a digital training tool, a set of video training tools for support professionals to use in their work with Indigenous people with disabilities. And the third project had a broader mandate, which in the end we found allowed us to pursue a nice combination of both of the first mandates. So both to increase awareness of the situation of First Nations people with disability in the communities, promote inclusion, and also to promote best practices for support professionals who were working with them. And so again, very briefly, there were overarching project objectives between these three projects that we carried out. The first was to understand the reality of disability in First Nations. So what we see is that while there are a lot of statistics available regarding First Nations people with disability, there are very few places where you can hear the voices of the people with disabilities coming from the communities, where you can understand really what disability is in the communities, what it means. And so we really wanted to bring a spotlight onto the communities and to understand better what disability meant in the communities. We wanted to bring in an ecological approach to our research, where we could focus on facilitators and barriers in the environment to people with disabilities, and we could also shine a spotlight on those. So in that way, we were hoping by bringing in an ecological model that we would counteract the rather prevalent deficit model that's being portrayed currently through statistics on disability in the communities. We had the goal to raise awareness of disability as a complex phenomenon, and also to create a variety of accessible educational and learning tools that would both raise awareness and promote inclusion in the communities. And so those were our main overarching objectives between the three projects. And so in regards to the methods that we employed, I thought it might be interesting to touch very quickly on the recruitment and the consent processes that we went through in establishing our research. And so again, just sort of sharing the successes that we had, as well as some of the new learning that we encountered while doing research with our partners. So the first thing is recruitment. And in doing research with Indigenous partners, again, as a measure of rigor and for new ethical obligations, researchers don't just go into a community now and start interviewing people who give consent, but first they must obtain consent from the community at the community level. And so the way that community consent is handled is quite different by different communities. Kahnawake, for example, has a very rigorous and formal research consent process where there's an ethical application, which is very similar to the type of ethical application that you would fill out to a college or a university to do the research. We also met with the Research Council in Kahnawake and presented our proposal to them to gain consent to be able to do research in the communities. For other communities, we worked more closely with our partners, and they had a more informal approach to giving community consent. And this could be done via conversation, and consent may be oral or written. In addition to this, we also did research with different large organizations, such as the First Nations Human Resources Development Commission. So we interviewed employment and training support professionals. We interviewed security income agents for the First Nation of Quebec and Labrador Health and Social Services Commission. And we also interviewed adult education teachers and support staff from the First Nation Adult Education Center. So for each of the organizations, we also used an organizational consent form in addition to the community consent form. And in the link that I sent, that is an excellent guide to writing up your consent forms. It's essentially, it's like any other consent form where you provide context, why the research is necessary, the objectives, the relevance, your ethical procedures, and the products that you hope to create. So in this way, it's very similar to a typical consent form, but it's specifically for these different levels of the communities. And the last piece of consent that I wanted to share with you was our consent form that we created for our participants who had disabilities. And so the reason that I wanted to touch on this today was to bring into our awareness accessibility when we're designing consent processes. What we wanted to do was to create a consent form that could also act as a guide booklet. So sort of perhaps counterintuitively, our consent form for participants was extremely long, maybe 13 pages. But what we wanted to do was to use large font, to use images for people that may have disabilities that was going to impede reading abilities, or also just to increase accessibility in the concept if there were people with developmental disabilities that may have struggled with some of the content. In addition to this, we also employed a method whereby support professionals would use our consent form as a guide. And in advance of us visiting the communities, they would sit with the potential participants and go through the guide at a pace that was comfortable for the participants, and explain the projects as well as the participants' roles. And so we also wanted to extend the ability for individuals that may not have had their own power of attorney to give their own consent to participate in the projects if possible. And so we implemented a system that's being promoted right now in the research area to present the information about the project, and then to simply ask the participants 6 questions to make sure that they understood the entire consent process and would be able to give informed consent regarding their participation. If they didn't understand, we could also bring the consent form back to the person who may have had their power of attorney, and together they could decide if the person wanted to participate in the project. And so this, I also wanted to attach this into the chat, but I'm not able, but I'm sure we'll find a way to get it to you. If you're interested, you can have a look at our accessible consent form, which again, it sort of acts as a booklet as well as just a simple consent form. And so now, very quickly, moving on to the next section, I wanted to share with you our research methods. So, and again, just very quickly, we did employ a community-based participatory research approach. And this is being recommended as one of the predominant Indigenous approaches to doing research with community participants. So we very, very much followed the community-based participatory guidelines to shape every aspect of our project. And our community-based partners were present with us throughout the ethics, the recruitment, developing the questionnaires, the interview questions. They did interviews with us. We always went in pairs to do our interviews. And they were very, very heavily implicated in the analysis of the research, as well as in developing the knowledge transfer deliverables. And so what we wanted to do at the same time, what was really important to me, was that as we were developing this very solidly ethically based research, we put a simultaneous focus on developing very strong empirical research at the same time. In this way, it was the goal of our research to conduct very strong empirical research that we could share back with the field. And in that way, as I mentioned, decolonize and indigenize the field of study. And so we chose a phenomenological approach to our qualitative analysis. The phenomenological approach we found was very compatible with this type of research, as it encourages the researcher to put down all pre-assumptions, and it is noted as a very good methodology to be used in different research with different cultures. I think for that reason, that you are meant to really put down your assumptions about the phenomena and focus on allowing the essence of the phenomena to emerge via the voices of the participants. And so we were able to, by using this phenomenological empirical approach framed within our community-based participatory approach, we were able to create research that was both empirically robust as well as ready to be transformed into accessible knowledge transfer products for the communities who participated with us. So breezing by very quickly, the following 5 points were incredibly important to us. Oh, my cat is getting in on the presentation. Yes, so in regards to our knowledge transfer, I would say that these 5 points guided us through every aspect of taking the qualitative data that we collected, analyzing it, and transforming it into solid knowledge transfer products that would benefit the communities, that would decolonize the area on multiple levels, that would promote self-determination, empowerment, and advocacy in the communities, that would give voice to Indigenous experts, and of course, to indigenize the area of academic knowledge that was to be advanced. So these 5 principles guided us in our process. Here I wanted to show you just very quickly the knowledge that emerged from our interviews. So we collected data from elders, from support professionals, and from First Nations people with disability, ranging across the ages from 18 to 65, and ranging in all different types of disabilities. So I wanted to show you the knowledge that emerged, the Indigenous knowledge that emerged regarding disability, and in which way that we took this information and framed the sort of global disability knowledge in the Indigenous knowledge. So we had the medicine wheel and knowledge of the medicine wheel emerge, the knowledge from the Turtle Island story, as well as contemporary values of strong and united communities, families, and culture. And so what we found when we began our interviews was that when we asked people, what is disability? The most common response was them to ask us back, what is disability? Like, what do you mean? What is disability? What are you talking about? And then I'll answer your question. And so this was a prevalent theme throughout the interviews, and it became very apparent to us on the research team that people were asking for information. And so it was our challenge to both provide resources that gave an answer that wasn't currently in the communities, and so to find good, strong ecological or strength-based models of disability to share, but to frame those models within the Indigenous knowledge that also emerged from our data collection. And so a really quick overview, we were able to create multimedia tools to increase accessibility of these concepts. And so we had a whiteboard animation, learning video module, an interactive virtual tool, which I'm going to be able to show you a quick glimpse of in the upcoming slides, as well as digital simulation training tools and interview videos from the communities, from people with disabilities who shared their stories. And so in each of these tools, these are the areas of either ecological disability models or Indigenous traditional or contemporary knowledge that we tried to merge in presenting balanced information to the participants, to the communities, and also to interested advocates and allies. And so for our knowledge transfer, we housed all of the information on one website. So we wanted the information to be easy to access, easy to find, and in one place where people could go to search for information that they were looking for. And so as a way to increase accessibility of all of this information, we used a color coding scheme that matched our logo. And so on the landing page is where people can learn more about the logo, about the word Nizidotem, learning together, which we used as our slogan. And then we have our green section where we answer the question, what is disability? Again, we answer this question with strength-based or ecological models of disability framed in that contemporary or traditional Indigenous knowledge. And then we have a section for support professionals surrounding supporting clients through processes of increasing self-determination and labor market participation. In fact, our website is geared towards adults. And so for each of these sections, we have learning modules that are text-based, and they are connected to video or video training or interactive tools that the users of the website can interact with to augment their learning. The yellow section is a toolbox. So in this one place, we put all of our multimedia tools, in addition to a virtual resource library and an interactive map of services that can be filtered by region, that can be filtered by type of disability, or that can be filtered by type of services. And then in the fifth section, our Black section, that's where people can read a report about the research, the findings, and also learn more about the team and contact us if interested. And so moving along so quickly, here's a screenshot just from one of the pages. So as you can see, the big buttons, they represent learning modules about various aspects of disability. Here is an example. If you click a button, this is the web page that will open up. And so you can see that there's a text introduction to the concept. There's a place where you can click and go into a text learning module regarding the topic. And finally, at the end, here we have a link to the toolbox where the user can interact with a multimedia tool in order to augment their access to the information. I wanted to quickly show you this digital tool that we created. So I'm just going to mute it because it makes some noise. This tool is formatted as a board game, although there are a lot of explanations given in advance to the user, so they're aware that while it looks like a board game, in fact, this is a tool that is addressing very complex issues, including risk and resilience, and including sort of an ecological model of disability and of human development that puts a spotlight on the importance of environmental characteristics in a person's experience. And so what we did with this tool was we took the framework from the risk and resilience research, which shines a spotlight on the significance of positive and negative life events on outcomes. And then we were able to take major examples of life experiences from that research and then go back to our data and use examples from the stories of our data to indigenize and to make relevant the content. So we were able to get examples from the data to incorporate in this learning tool. The overall goal of the tool is to emphasize the effect that positive and negative life experiences have on an individual's resilience and on their levels of resilience, as well as their ability to cope with major life obstacles. And so we wanted to, again, bring back to the community's knowledge about environments and about the impact on environments on the individual. Because what we saw a lot in our data collection was that people that were not experiencing positive life outcomes were very much blaming themselves and had very much internalized a deficit approach to their own success without realizing the impact that the environment played in their own life path. So we really wanted to externalize those concepts in this tool. Okay. You can also see that in the Understanding Disability section of the website, we put out a concrete definition of disability because so many people had asked us to do that. And we wanted to include invisible disabilities in this definition, including mental health, as those often were not under the umbrella that people thought about when they thought about disability. And we, again, wanted to frame this knowledge in an Indigenous, with the Indigenous knowledge of the medicine wheel, risk and resilience, and the importance of community values that people told to us. I don't think I have time to play you the video, but I would encourage you to have a peek and have a look at it because It's laid out to be a learning tool, so it's quite long, I think 8 minutes, but it really touches on all of the wonderful and rich knowledge that we've gained in the communities. And I really think there's such a potential for an indigenized model of disability to augment the ecological models that are being used at the moment in the field, and that there's a real richness in the framing of disability information in the medicine wheel and on our consideration of life with wellness and with balance. So again, I don't have time, but I would strongly recommend that you have a look. Here you can see quickly that we also included interviews from people from the communities where they shared their stories, and we were able to tie specific topics like trauma, like ecological models, like even issues surrounding traditional healing methods versus Western methods, and the how some people like to combine these. So we covered a lot of topics in these interviews, and we're very excited about having this set of interviews as a first step. And we hope that we can continue to build on this section so we can share more and more stories from the communities regarding disability and people's experiences. On that same theme, we also included our main thematic findings from the qualitative analysis, and we shared those. And we also shared quotes from the interviews, again, in the hopes of just putting out the voices of people with disabilities so they can tell their own stories, and they have the forum to define disability in the communities over and above, any sort of analysis that we might be giving or doing. Quickly, this is the supporting clients section. It's red. We have slightly different section layout where we have learning modules on the first 2 buttons, and the third button is the digital training tool. And so this is an example of what a user might encounter if they click on the learning segment of the supporting client section. And for each of the digital training tools, which are video training tools where users can try different approaches to supporting clients and see the result of those approaches. So in each of these videos, we try to address a type of a disability and then a broad disability area. So for example, stigma, ableism, reintegration support, inclusive employment, invisible disabilities, and privacy and disclosure. So I think, there we go. If you'd like to see more, I strongly recommend checking out the website. Here's where you can have access to all of the amazing knowledge that we gained in the communities. And thank you so much.